We're back on the road this April with our live show, Cocaine Cowboys. If you want to hear the story of Ireland's love affair with Colombian powder and those who made millions in the gold rush, limited availability remains in Belfast at ulsterhall.co.uk. That's ulsterhall.co.uk.
So all of their plotting and criminality kind of came to a slightly unglamorous and unshowy end today for three individuals who've been, in the Sunday world for many years as properties that were seized off them by the Criminal Assets Bureau went up for auction online. Not a kind of a ending with a whimper rather than a bang, I suppose.
Yeah, I suppose it was quiet. There wasn't the sound of the auctioneer's gavel or people yelling and screaming and all the rest of it. Yeah, but plot is certainly the operative word, all right.
Yeah, well, they may have been yelling and screaming at their computer screens at home, but there wasn't any live action of it anyway.
No, I mean, look, this is the way it's done now, I guess. So, yeah. I mean, I was just there watching. It lasted for an hour. So there was 5 properties went up for sale. 3 of them would have been Ross Browning's. Yeah. So one of those 3 was the kind of, I suppose, the main one in a sense that had a reserve price of 550,000. And it was a three-bed house that he lived in himself with his wife, as well as the cottage that his mother and her partner lived in, Chestnut Lodge. Now, we featured these plenty of times already. Yeah. They're nice looking, very well done. It's on 3.2 acres. There's, pretty big sheds, a little equestrian centre, the whole lot. Of course, he had the escape chute as well from the bedroom upstairs in the house down into the garage where a motorcycle was ready and waiting when the guards visited at some point in the past. So, I mean, that was the kind of the headline property, really, so to speak. Also for sale then was, I suppose, a more modest 5-bedroom house in Belgar Heights in Tallaght that had once belonged to Pale Miley Connors, who was, of course, one of the kind of most notorious burglary gang leaders, I think, that we've managed to acquire in Ireland. His son, Fat Andy Connors, was a fairly famous gangland figure in his own right before he was shot dead. I think, was it 2016 back then? Yeah. Around then anyway. So his house certainly looked more modest, but it had a reserve price of 240, and that was the one that had, I suppose, the most bidding. There was 79 separate bids made. There was, I think, in the final minute, there was 7 different people going at it. Going up €1,000 at a time. Okay. So I think it kind of says more about the desire for property in that neck of the woods, where houses similar to that were going well in excess of 400,000. Yeah. So the final price of 322,000, I think, was a pretty decent bargain. Now they're probably going to have to spend a fair whack as well to bring it up. It was probably the worst property in terms of the condition it was in. It looked pretty nasty. And can you see who's bidding? Like, do you have to do it by name, or do you have to log in? Or no, you don't see. You have to log in, and you register as either someone who's going to bid or someone who's watching. So even though I was registered as someone to watch, there was a big bid on this button on the screen, which I managed not to hit use at any stage, especially on Ross Browning's. I hadn't gone for. I wasn't going to sign that expense, Eamon, if it had come my way. It would have been tricky, all right, to try and explain that one. We might have got a front page out of it, but with me going to prison for false accounting or something. So did they start up so they say in the Pale Miley Connors house, like that went from what to what? Well, I mean, it's all of them started off like the only one that had an initial bid was the Connors house. Yeah. And that was for the reserve price of 240. Yeah. And the only other one then was plot number 2, which was one of the little seaside plots in Rush, County Dublin, belonging to Browning. And that was second, and that was again for its reserve price of 45,000, and nobody else. There was no further bids on that. Yeah, and it's just a matter of you can see how many people are watching. You can see what time a bid was made, how much it was for, and it happens live. So your screen updates as soon as somebody puts in a bid. I mean, if you've used your email, you're also getting all this on email as well, so you can see what's happening. Yeah. So some people obviously were playing it pretty cool. I mean, certainly, all the interest seemed to be in the Connors house. You know? I mean, after 20 minutes, it was the only one, apart from the single bid on the plot in Rush, it was the only one that was getting any kind of traction in terms of the price was going up steadily all the time. And there was nothing happening with the main property, with Branding's main property and the second plot of land as well. And even David Waldron's house in Killala Road, which is probably the house I would have thought was probably the easiest to sell.
Yeah.
It's ready to move into. It's in a sought after part of town now by a lot of people. Like, it's a Dublin's so expensive to get into. Buying in Cabra is a real option for a lot of people now.
Or Fabra, as the Irish Times.
Fabra now, is it? Yeah, I didn't realise that.
No. I mean, Cabra is it's been gentrified, and the houses are going for huge values. I mean, an average 3-bedroom house in Cabra, I think, could be approaching 400,000 at this stage. So what did his...
And well, it's funny because there must have been a lot of people, compared to, say, Branning's main property, like there was 28 people watching that. There was 58 watching the house in Cabra. So, right. I mean, there was a lot more interest, I think. Now, there was interest, but in terms of bidders, it took a long time. And there was one bid relatively early on. I think it was well after the first 30 minutes. And it was for the reserve price, which I think was 275,000. And then there was just 2 bidders, and they went at it a little bit. One of them kind of went crazy and went up by $5,000 in a single bid. And it eventually went for 284. And it was just the 2 bidders going for it, So, I mean, again, I think there was a similar end of Terrace House I was looking at there last year, and it went for 344. So, I guess it's a good bargain. I suppose the premium, the margin you're paying for there is the fact that you're moving into, Christopher Kit Waldron's old home. So, I have a feeling that a lot of these properties are actually bought by investors and they're going to be rented out.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people might be nervous for whatever reason.
Well, definitely, I think with some of the burn organised crime houses that were seized, in particular Sean McGovern's house, I mean, that was stayed on the market for a long time. Crumlin, very like Cabra, that, houses are selling, the values of them are really going up. But that took a long, long time to sell. There probably is a gangland discount, is there, in the sense that people would be wary of? I suppose,
it's what would you say, in a conscious state, it's been priced in.
Yeah,
so, I mean, there is an element of, you're going to get a bargain, but you're going to get it for a reason. And I think, that's why it probably suits a builder stroke developer to buy these properties. Like we know, Liam Burns' house, number 2 Raleigh Square, went to a company that's a rental company.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure about other properties recently that have gone for sale. Now, don't forget some of these places, like they weren't up for, they're not up, they haven't gone for sale yet. But you have the Gitt's brother, David Waldron's house. He's 3 houses now that have been totally, deemed the proceeds of crime.
Yeah.
And one of those, the main mansion, I suppose, Darview Heights, that was sold in Wexford, that's apparently rented out. So there's people unconnected with crime living in that at the minute. So I mean, they obviously have no problem. So I think to some extent that there won't be a big issue. I mean, even if I saw that last year, I was at the auction for Barry Fowler's house from the drug dealer from Tala, who was connected to the Kinahan Cartel, and they had a house himself and his wife in Oilgate in County Wexford, and that went for a decent price of 266.
Yeah.
There wasn't. I think there was only 2 bidders there. That was a live auction that was out in Clondalkin. I went to that, and there was people on the phone, and I think there was 1 bidder in the room, and that was it.
Yeah,
it was more old fashioned. But I think a lot of people now, you just do it. I mean, you don't have to show your poker face. No. You can just do it online. It's probably easier in one sense.
I mean, it's interesting with the Waldrons there. You obviously had the piece on the weekend, kind of going into the background of the criminality of, it was David Waldron in particular, but he was obviously, his brother Christopher was his closest associate, you could say. And you see over that, I suppose that covers, a sort of roughly a 20-year period of his associations and his criminal activity, David Waldron's. It actually makes, if you step back and look at it, it makes for quite grim reading, doesn't it? In terms of the number of people that he knew that ended up being killed, often by other people he may have known. And then, they did make bursts of money, but it all amounts to nothing now, and it's sold off online to an anonymous bidder.
Yeah, it's an element of unpaid tax is one way of looking at it. I mean, today's sales raised 1.2, just a little over 1.2 million for those 5 properties. So I mean, that's a significant sum of money. Now, maybe if those houses in 2 years' time, if somebody bothers to check, together might have made 2 million if they hadn't been, belonging to somebody involved in gangland crime. But like all 3 are pretty significant. I mean, You know, I mean, like even, you know, you're talking about David Waldron, you know, what was it all for kind of, you know, element. And you could say that now when you look at, you know, all the kind of the judgments, mortgage judgments against Anne Connors, Andy Connors' wife.
Yeah.
You know, what did Pale Miley get out of it at the end? Died, you know, whatever age he was, 79, I think, you know, it was still, I think, had outstanding criminal charges. Like, you know. I
mean, what Pale Miley had a phenomenal amount of convictions, didn't he, over a huge amount of...
Yeah, I mean, he was notorious as a burglar in the 70s. Like, you know, and he's still picking up convictions in the 2000s.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, his sons and grandkids, you know, some of them, you know, serious criminals, like, you know, involved in using tracker devices to hunt down business people who are trying to bring cash from their businesses in the UK, in Ireland, in Melbourne.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, they're not small time. I mean, they were really prolific, a really dangerous gang. I mean, they probably, not single-handedly, but almost single-handedly kind of led to that whole era of the fear of rural crime, where people were, you know, were genuinely afraid of who was going to turn up outside their you know, their remote houses in rural Ireland, because these guys were so busy. Like, I mean, they were doing, like, I mean, like in terms of, I mean, we did a story recently. Again, it's another property that's going to be up for sale relatively soon as well. Thomas Wall and his wife Tina, and he was part of the Bullet Connors gang, and again linked to Pale Miley's gang. And like his you know, the belief evidence in that was given. This is a story that we ran last January. The belief evidence in that just reads like a list of all these burglaries in Donegal and Mayo, and some of them would have been really affected people at the time, would have made a lot of headlines in the local papers and even the national papers. And they weren't, you know, these were the suspects. They were never caught for it.
No.
And these are, you know, they're based in Kildare, they're based in Dublin, and yet they're carrying out raids in Mayo and Donegal, like in remote areas. Like,
yeah, I mean, they professionalised a kind of a style of crime, I suppose, didn't it? Those burglary gangs where they were in and out really quickly. Up and down the motorways. And
there was different names for them, like the M50 gang, the Subaru gang, because at one stage, you know, 20 years ago, they were stealing the Subaru Impreza and chipping them or whatever, and they were basically they could outrun any Garda car for the simple reason that they were so reckless and crazy. And I think, like, again, you know, like, I mean, this gang were responsible probably for hurrying up and getting an aerial unit and having a Garda helicopter, and also some of them as well were involved. There was so much crime that, you know, again, it also influenced the whole idea around changing, you know, the bail laws, which of course we saw about the recently passed away Tony Faloni as well, like, you know, but I suppose it was about these kind of really recidivist criminals who just are prolific and just keep at it and can't stop or won't stop.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, they're in and out of prison, and they don't care about their own personal safety, you know.
No, and they weren't, of course, they'd be caught for a bit and they wouldn't get huge sentences and be in and out. And of course, they were in and out of the houses just as quickly, weren't they? It was, you know, a lot of these burglaries are done in a matter of minutes, wasn't it?
It is, yeah, they were. And because, I suppose, of the sheer volume, that this is where we come back then to the property that Cab are seizing, that it wasn't small time.
Yeah.
You know, they're breaking in, saying, oh, they're breaking into a filling station and they're stealing cigarettes.
Yeah.
But they're doing that 5 times in a single night, and they're maybe doing it 4 nights a week.
Yeah.
You know, it's adding up to several thousands.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I mean, they're probably making 20, 30, 40 grand even on a good night.
Yeah.
So, you know, multiply that, it's all of a sudden you're getting close to $500,000 a month.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, it wouldn't be necessarily one individual or 5 or 6. You know, it's a collective of, you know, 20 or 30 people.
Yeah.
But the guys at the top, like Pale Miley and Fat Andy, were the guys who are really raking it in.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I suppose even with the Waldron brothers, like, you know, I mean, you know, they took over, I suppose, a lucrative patch, and they were selling, you know, they were moving on a lot of drugs, and you know, had so much money, had to put it somewhere. And I mean, and like the eye-watering expense that went into likes of Darview Heights, you know, it's going to hurt them, like, you know, to know that they don't have access to these properties anymore.
And I think it does act as a serious deterrent for criminals. Like, if you look at the Waldrons, like, although they were very, very significant players in Dublin and probably elsewhere as well, but like the amount of money that he could amass without being an international wholesaler, like, it is quite stunning. Like, it's a huge amount of money we're moving around, and a lot of people getting sucked into that movement of cash. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, you see that in a lot of those cab cases where, you know, they're trying to move money around to make it difficult for the investigators, but it seems to be they can obviously figure out where the circular, cash is going on, where I'm giving you 10 grand and you give 10 grand to someone else and they give to someone else and it comes back to me. It's rubbish. They can follow, even if you break it up into small amounts and do it through your credit union account. If you can't explain where the cash came from, it came from the 10 grand that began with me and ended with me.
Yeah.
No matter how many kind of buffers you put it through.
And that was also the undoing of Ross Browning in this case as well, wasn't it, really? The movement of cash between, family members and their extended network.
Yeah, I mean, it very much seems to be his job to be the cartel's man in Ireland. I mean, that phrase has been used so many times now, but it was said in court. He was the number one, the Kinahan cartel's number one man in Ireland, and it was a €1 billion drug enterprise that that's what it was all about.
Yeah.
So obviously his share, I'm sure some of it was salted away quite carefully, because we know, as well as drug smuggling, the Kinahans are experts in laundering as well. We know they've massive international connections, and to be honest, the 550,000 that the state gets back, from the sale of these properties today is probably the tip of a very large iceberg. But I mean, his attempt to kind of, with his kind of fitness guru business and his gym, giving gifts to his relatives, and to their partners and all the rest. I mean, running a business without a bank account, using somebody else's credit card to pay for flights of people directly linked to the Kinahans, coming from the States or whatever. All of that stuff, just added up. It was all just unexplained wealth, and that's the kind of, I suppose, the beauty of the Proceeds of Crime Act is that it's about unexplained wealth. It can't be unexplained. You have to explain it. And the onus is on you, the gangster, to say, well, I want to play cards. Who with? Where did he get his money? It doesn't go for just one round of hiding the money, like in one sense it used to. I mean, again, like with Filoni, when it came up, looking back at the stuff this week after he passed away, like his initial, he had a lot of unexplained wealth, but his initial it was revenue going after him, and it kind of actually preceded, what the Criminal Assets Bureau could do, and then they took it over, and it just showed you how effective they were. There was so much, the legislation just made it so much more efficient and so much easier. Yeah. Like that, and it just completely switched the onus of proof onto the person, the gangster with the cash that everyone knew was an out-and-out gangster.
Yeah, I mean, it's the CAB are now running a few of these auctions. This is obviously probably not run by CAB, but they have also auctioned off. They're auctioning off these big, beautiful properties, but they've also been auctioning off everything from Montclair jackets and Rolex watches. All
your designer watches. Yeah, there was a well-timed one there just before Christmas with lots of luxury goods, including, I think it was a gold bars and various bits and bobs like that, which did a lot. But I mean, I think that the CAB I think they understand very much, like part of their remit is to make a really obvious public point, and that there's no point in selling this stuff off to a dealer, to a wholesaler to move them on for you, and then they want to do a big show. Yeah. Here's a bunch of gangsters' watches. Give us what you want for them. Yeah. But there is also a legal obligation that they have to get the open market price. They can't do a quiet deal. They can't say, for instance, hand a gold bar to a charity, but they can't hand over a property to a charity, to somebody or to the local authorities saying that there's a housing crisis in this area. We're going to give this property to you. They're not actually allowed to do that. They do actually have to put it on the market. And I suppose an auction is a real obvious way. It's an open market.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's progressive myself. I think it shows the work they do. I think it also is a deterrent, or it is it's all very well buying your Montclair jacket, but if you know that someday that it's going to be in the papers that it was taken off you and auctioned off for 400 or 500 quid or whatever, like it is the right way for the police forces to go. And I do think CAB have been kind of at the forefront of even the simple fact of putting the cases ahead of them appearing on social media. It is a kind of a bit of a change for some of the Gardaí, isn't it?
I know. I think. I mean, I suppose like the rest of Irish society, even the guards, some of them are becoming progressive. Yeah. And I suppose the thing about the Criminal Assets Bureau is not all guards. I mean, there are people from other departments, and there is also their legal officers as well. And some of them, I'm sure, are quite ambitious and might have, an eye on the Attorney General's job or something like that in years to come, or other, state jobs. But I mean, like they know what they're doing. Like, I mean, and they have the legislation to back it up. They're looking to change that now to make it even easier. I mean, there was the time where you had to hold on to assets for 7 years before they could, finally, dispose of them.
Yeah.
Which is kind of wrong at a time when there's a housing crisis and if you're sitting on a load of property. So what they're doing now sometimes is they're getting permission to sell it, and then the actual assets, the money that comes from those sales, that's what's held on to now for 7 years, rather than the car or the house. They're able to move things on. So, if you win your case, you don't necessarily get your house back, but you get the money plus the interest that you would have got if you'd owned that at the time. So you're not being deprived of your wealth if it turns out that you were wrong all along. But it's unlikely, because I mean, once it gets to that point, you've already gone through so many stages. You've gone through the in-camera Section 2 part of it, where the judge has more or less made a decision that it looks like it's pretty much the proceeds of crime. And then even before then, we start to hear stuff then in court when it's at various applications are made in Section 2, Section 4, and other sections as well. Sometimes they can skip. They don't necessarily go through it step by step.
Yeah,
it just depends what way the case is going.
Well, I'll have to log on to the next one, and maybe if there's...
It was very exciting for the first 30 minutes. No, it wasn't.
Well, I'll check it out myself next time. Thanks very much, Eamon.
Always a pleasure, Niall.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.